In a village where most adults had never finished school, and where the sound of a child reading was a miracle, one girl taught dozens to read without ever speaking a single word. She was born into silence, never said mama, never whispered secrets to friends, never shouted with joy, not once. Most thought she had nothing to say. They were wrong, because Mira Dawson didn't need words to teach. She had eyes that noticed everything, hands that could show what mouths couldn't say, and a spirit that refused to disappear, even when the world looked the other way. It began with a single letter traced in the dirt. But what came next would transform an entire village. And Mira, she didn't just teach them to read books. She taught them to read each other. But her most powerful lesson, that would come when a stranger tried to silence her again, and she chose to speak back without ever making a sound. Mira Dawson was born in the hills of southern Appalachia, in a village so small it didn't have a library or even streetlights, just dirt roads, wood stoves, and stories passed down by word of mouth. But Mira never heard a single one. She was born profoundly deaf, and as the years passed, it became clear she wouldn't speak either. No babbling, no mimicked words, just soft eyes and curious hands, always reaching, always asking, in a language no one around her spoke. Her mother, a seamstress, loved her fiercely. Her father, a quiet man himself, built her a shelf for picture books, even though they had to drive hours to find any. But beyond their small home, most people didn't know what to do with a girl like Mira. At school enrollment, the principal shook his head. "We're not equipped," he said. "She needs special services. Someone else's problem." There was no therapist, no interpreter, no one to explain that Mira's mind was just as sharp, maybe sharper, than any other child's. She spent her days alone, watching her younger brother sound out words while she traced the letters with her fingers on the tabletop. At night, she copied the shapes she remembered, C, H, T, into the dusty window pane, hoping someday someone would understand. She began teaching herself to lip read, not because anyone taught her, but because she had to. When her brother learned to read from their father's old newspaper, Mira sat across the table copying the headlines in silence. She didn't know what the words meant, not yet, but she remembered every letter, every pattern, every page. She started to dream in pictures. Letters floated across her thoughts like fireflies. She imagined them lighting up her town, on signs and songs, even in prayers. But no one saw what she saw, not yet, because until the day she drew her first letter in the dirt, most of the village still saw her as the quiet girl with nothing to say. What they didn't realize was that she'd been preparing to teach them all along. It was a humid spring afternoon when everything changed. The children had gathered, as they always did, beneath the giant oak tree that curved its branches like arms around the clearing. Most came out of curiosity, some came to mock. But Mira came with intention. That day she carried something new, a flat stone she'd painted with white chalk and a bundle of twigs tied with string, her makeshift chalkboard and pointer. As the children laughed and played, Mira sat quietly, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice. It was Lily, the baker's daughter, who wandered over first, curious about the strange marks Mira had etched in the dirt. A curved line, a straight one, a symbol she didn't recognize. Mira pointed to it, then to her lips, then to a drawing of an apple. "A," she mouthed silently, then took Lily's hand and guided it through the air. The girl blinked, then smiled, and for the first time repeated the shape on her own. That small gesture, that single letter, was like striking a match. Within minutes, 3 more children gathered, then 6, then 10. Some copied, some stared, and one older boy scoffed, "Why would I learn from a girl who can't even speak?" Mira didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded paper she'd written the night before, with all the letters she'd taught herself, and one simple sentence at the bottom. Words are not made with sound, they're made with meaning. She handed it to the boy. He didn't reply, but the next day he came back with a twig in his hand. And so it began. Each day, under that oak tree, more children returned. Each day, Mira taught them more through gestures, drawings, pointing, and patience. She built an entire system, a blend of letters, symbols, sign language, and touch. It wasn't formal, it wasn't standard, but it worked. By the end of the month, 12 children could spell their names, 6 could write full sentences, and all of them understood what it meant to be seen by someone who never spoke. But what none of them knew was that a storm was coming, not from the sky, but from the system, because word had started to spread, and not everyone was happy that the village's new teacher was a girl who had never said a word. Within weeks, Mira's classroom outgrew the shade of the oak tree. Children arrived early, carrying baskets of berries or fresh bread as thanks. Mothers lingered nearby, watching from a distance. Fathers, curious but skeptical, stood with folded arms just beyond the fence. But Mira didn't ask for permission. She offered something else: consistency. Every day she returned, chalkboard in hand, flashcards in her bag, and a soft, steady presence that needed no voice to command respect. She created new symbols to help younger kids memorize sounds. Colored stones became vowel markers, hand gestures became grammar cues. Even the older children began helping the younger ones, turning Mira's class into a community effort. And then something remarkable happened. A woman named Mrs. Redmond, who had never learned to write her own name, asked Mira if she could join the class. "Just for the basics," she whispered. Mira nodded. Within a week, 4 more adults joined, then 10. Soon, Mira's students ranged from age 5 to 67. And in that unlikely classroom, in a dusty clearing with no roof, no bookshelves, no funding, people were learning to read, not just letters and sounds, but contracts, prescription labels, grocery lists, even love letters. The village changed, quietly at first. Shopkeepers started writing signs. Neighbors left written notes for one another. A boy who once mocked Mira began teaching his younger sister the alphabet. Even the local church began printing hymns in large letters so the entire congregation could follow along. The same teacher who once dismissed Mira as unfit asked her, through hand gestures and a shaky voice, if she could teach him how to sign "Good morning." And still, Mira said nothing. She only smiled, nodded, and taught. But just as her influence was spreading, just as the village began to believe in her vision, an official letter arrived from the county. It said a state education inspector was coming to evaluate the unauthorized learning gatherings led by someone with no formal certification. And just like that, the village began to hold its breath. Would they shut her down? Would they dismiss everything she'd built just because she had never spoken? The letter came on a Thursday, stamped, signed, and official. Cold words printed in black ink. The county does not recognize informal Unsupervised education led by unlicensed individuals. A review will be conducted immediately. For the first time since she started, Mira didn't come to the oak tree. The children waited, the parents waited. But Mira stayed home, hands folded in her lap, her chalk untouched. She wasn't afraid for herself, she was afraid for them, for the progress, the pride, the joy she'd helped awaken in people who had long been left behind. She knew what officials like this one believed, that learning only counted when it came from someone with a title, that silence meant ignorance, that difference was disorder. On inspection day, the village gathered. The inspector was stiff-suited, clipboard in hand, with a forced smile and eyes already full of doubt. He asked questions she couldn't hear, dismissed answers she couldn't speak. He looked around at the hand-drawn letters and color-coded stones and said, "This is touching. But it's not formal instruction. No curriculum, no voice, no structure." The village teacher tried to defend her. Mrs. Redmond, now able to write her name, stepped forward, shaking, holding up a page Mira had helped her fill out for her medical prescription. "She saved my life," she whispered, but the inspector simply wrote something down and began to walk away. That's when Mira moved. She stepped forward, reached into her bag, and pulled out a long piece of parchment. Written on it, by hand, was a full lesson plan. Color-coded units, phonics charts, names of every student, progress records, even alternative learning tools she'd invented herself. The inspector paused. Mira then took a deep breath and raised her hands. She began to sign, not just letters, not just words, but the story, her story. One child stepped forward and translated aloud, his voice shaken but steady. She says she was never taught the way the rest of us were, but she learned anyway. She says every symbol she draws is a door for someone else. She says, "You don't need a voice to teach. You need someone who listens." The clearing was silent. Then came applause, not thunderous, not dramatic, but real. The inspector didn't say much. He simply closed his notebook and left. A week later, the village received notice. The informal education program at Dawson Grove is hereby recognized under the Community Learning Inclusion pilot. Mira had done it, not just taught letters, not just opened minds. She had rewritten the rules of what it means to be a teacher, and she never said a single word. Mira Dawson never spoke a word aloud, not as a child, not as a teacher, not even the day her village honored her with a plaque beneath the old oak tree where it all began. But her silence, it never meant absence, it meant attention. She listened in ways others couldn't, to body language, to hesitation, to the quiet yearning of people who had been told their whole lives that learning wasn't for them. Mira taught more than letters. She taught a language of dignity, of patience, of presence. In a world that prizes volume, she showed what happens when we slow down and truly see each other. She proved that leadership doesn't require a podium, that teaching doesn't always need a voice, and that education at its core isn't about credentials or chalkboards. It's about connection. Mira's story isn't just about what she gave her village. It's about what she revealed in them and in us. That brilliance comes in many forms. That communication is deeper than sound. And that sometimes the quietest among us carry the most powerful lessons. If Mira's story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share this video with someone who's ever felt unheard, who's ever been overlooked, or who's ever taught others just by showing up with love and patience. Leave a comment below. Who taught you something life-changing without ever needing to say a word? Whether it was a look, a gesture, or just their presence, we want to hear your story. And if you believe that leadership has no single shape, no single sound, subscribe to Able in every way. Because we celebrate the strength that doesn't shout, the teachers who go unrecognized, and the lessons that echo louder than any voice ever could.